In 2010, a little-known Conservative backbench MP, Chris White, tabled a private member's bill in the House of Commons. It became the Public Services Social Value Act 2012. I beg your pardon, I'm looking for my slides. There we are. It became the Public Services Social Value Act 2012 after one of the longest gestation periods for private members' legislation in parliamentary history. We might one day look back on this act as one of the most revolutionary pieces of legislation. Essentially, it regulates the commissioning and procurement of services by public bodies by requiring them to be aware of the social and environmental impact of such actions. But whilst it doesn't require them to act on such considerations, it does allow them to do so. Any tender for service delivery above a certain threshold could, in effect, have up to 10% of its cost offset by including in the price of the contract the value of loosely defined core or collateral social and environmental benefits. In this way, a tender that wasn't the cheapest but would bring additional benefits to a community, greater in value than the difference in costs, could be chosen by the procurer in preference to a slightly cheaper one. Gone were the days of compulsory competitive tendering, even best value was being redefined. Some councils took up the challenge. At a time of austerity, whilst suffering unprecedented cuts in their spending, they had to find public benefit wherever they could. And this looked like a cost-effective way of doing it. Using the Act would improve engagement in the community and boost those parts of the economy which were doing good. A social value calculation might include the creation of apprenticeships, boosting employee volunteering, reducing carbon footprint, or employing ex-offenders. Each measure, each element could be given a monetary value, enabling its owner's case to be compared against other tenders. Social enterprises in particular were delighted. Where their purpose matched the one driving a tender, then it was clear new commercial opportunities were emerging for them. And so they were, but not across the board. The take-up of the Act amongst local authorities was neither immediate nor universal. Most councils, the smaller ones, were unlikely to put out to tender many contracts that exceeded the threshold, so the Act passed them by. But larger authorities routinely did, and some of them realised that the Act could open many doors. Birmingham and Croydon were amongst the pioneers. Manchester is now a leader too. According to Social Enterprise UK, more than a third of councils today use the Act to commission quanta of social value over and above those stipulated in their contracts. They've done this by going beyond the words of the Act. They've done this by ignoring the threshold, applying the Act to all service contracts. They've done it by applying the Act to goods as well as to services, to goods and works as well as to services. And they've done it by requiring different amounts of social value on different contracts, even up to 20%, double the level stipulated in guidance. All of these actions are technically outside the scope of the Act, but they shouldn't be. A year ago, we were promised a reassessment of the Act by the Civil Society Minister, and earlier this year, we were told that that review would be included in the government's broader civil society review. That review was published a few weeks ago. The Act is mentioned once, but no questions are asked as to how it can be improved or made more effective or used to deliver more social, environmental and economic value. So we must get on and do it ourselves. It's a great Act, but I'm calling on people today to ignore it. Go beyond. Use commissioning to create added social value however it works best for you. If you're tendering, use social value to distinguish your organisation from others. Make social value mainstream. Speaking to the Social Value Summit 4 weeks ago, David Gigg of the Office of Government Commerce conceded that central government had been very slow to appreciate the Act's benefits. It applies to central government as well as local government, but had come under pressure to do so, not just from other public sector procurers, but from the private sector too. Effectively, companies that were delivering outsourced services to government were saying, look, we've changed our ways to deliver benefits to society through adopting a social value approach when we work with local authorities. It works for them, it works for us, why don't you do the same? This is certainly the view of Interserve. They see benefits from adopting a social value approach for the company by winning local government contracts, reviewing their own internal procedures, and boosting employee and customer engagement. And so they apply Social Value Act criteria to their own supply chain too, making their company ready and able to demonstrate social value in any context in which they work. Over the last 18 months, says David Gigg, central government has taken the Act to heart, especially in the NHS, which, because of its size and purpose, has missed out most from failing to generate social value through its procurement policies. Meanwhile, Cordant, which is a 900 million turnover outsourcing and recruitment company, has taken this approach even further. Last autumn, Cordant took the unusual step of changing from a private company to a social enterprise, slashing the pay of its senior managers, capping its dividend payments, redefining its purpose, turning itself into an agent of social value, which happens to provide services to government and other customers. And the computer giant Fujitsu, an active member of business in the community, has written to its 1,600 suppliers, mostly UK-based SMEs, with a challenge. If they want to continue supplying the company, they must demonstrate that they're creating value in their communities. The Act's been taken up by other elements of the private sector, particularly in construction, where it's clearly changed corporate behaviour for the better. In his now famous letter of last January, Larry Fink, the Chief Executive Officer of the world's largest private investor, says to thousands of companies worldwide in which BlackRock invests, to prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. Companies must benefit all of their stakeholders, including the communities in which they operate. This is the private sector demonstrating a business case for delivering social value. Perhaps this is digressing from the theme of the morning, but only slightly. And there's more about this, as Michael kindly said, in my new book, The Company Citizen. But let's return to the challenge of that 10%, or whatever figure you choose to use. We know what 10% of monetary value looks like, but what does 10% of social value look like? How does a reduction in carbon footprint compare to the number of apprenticeships created? What does the phrase, "our company gave 1,000 volunteer hours to the community," actually mean? What difference has it made? Last year, Cliff Pryor of Big Society Capital told a conference that there were more people measuring social value than delivering it. Hyperbole, perhaps, but I've been told by a master's student that she's identified 1,100 ways of measuring social value. Fortunately, someone's trying to rationalise this. I sit on a committee at BSI, the British Standards Institution, whose 18-month mission is to examine the feasibility of establishing common frameworks and metrics for measuring social value. Reaching the former, the frameworks, is perhaps more promising than the latter. So these are my ideas about the principles that any measurement of social value should demonstrate. Social value is about change, making a difference. It's about outcomes, not inputs. We volunteered for 1,000 hours is an input. It doesn't tell you what's changed as a result of that input. It's okay to apply different social value criteria to the same process. A charity helping young people avoid gang culture may need to demonstrate internal cost efficiency to one stakeholder, savings to the public purse to another, heightened public perception to a third. But not everything is necessarily can be expressed readily in money terms. Some things will need proxies. I apologise for the layout of the slide. And it's not wrong to list employee engagement or other internal metrics as social value outcomes. Such gains are very valuable. And finally, ideally, social value is not an absolute measure, but a net one. Let me explain. Social value can measure how well an organisation achieves its purpose, can even help redefine what that purpose might be. Increasingly, organisations are adopting social missions and purposes alongside financial efficiency. Yet we have a habit of ignoring the externalities, especially negative externalities, negative social value. We're in good company. GDP ignores externalities too. That's why pollution, crime and poverty aren't included in our formal evaluation of nations. Here's a topical example. Provident Financial was a FTSE 100 company with a proud record on employee volunteering, no doubt generating a degree of social value. But last month, Provident Financial was fined £2 million and obliged to repay £170 million to their customers, people on low incomes who they'd ripped off. The company had demonstrated, I suggest, a net negative social value, however much volunteering its employees had done. So, measuring social value is both increasingly necessary, but also very challenging. And I've no doubt that generating social value will become part of the purpose of many mainstream private sector companies alongside the public sector, which of course actually exists to deliver social value, as does the growing social economy. Perhaps Chris White, like me, no longer an MP, did not realise what a potent force he was unleashing when he rose to his feet that Friday morning to propose the second reading of his bill. But it was good, and thank goodness that he did. Thank you.